Have you ever wondered why the massive economic and political changes happening across Asia could, well, completely change the way we look at stability and prosperity right here at home? It feels distant sometimes, but the data suggests it's maybe the defining contest of our era.
It's absolutely crucial to get our heads around this. It's not just some geopolitical drama playing out over there. It's really a structural contest between two competing models of economic organization, essentially. And the thing is, the stability and success of one model, it inherently undermines the other one.
Right. That's the mission today, isn't it? This deep dive is about synthesizing the data, the sources that analyze this shift in global power, specifically, the decline of U.S. hegemony and the deep internal factors driving it.
Exactly. We need to go deeper than just, say, surface-level trade disputes.
Much deeper. We're exploring everything from infrastructure, manufacturing power, all the way to, frankly, fundamental political dysfunction within the existing order.
And looking at the actual data points, the numbers that make the shift seem, well, pretty much incontrovertible. #TAC-I. The end of the unipolar moment. The macro shift.
Okay, so to understand where we are now, we probably need to recognize where we came from.
The historical context.
So for a few decades, after '91, right, after the Soviet Union dissolved, the U.S. had what people called the unipolar moment.
Undisputed number one. Economically, culturally, militarily. The whole package.
But the sources we've looked at are pretty clear. That era. Fundamentally over.
It really is. We are living in a multipolar era now, defined by competing centers of power and influence, not just one anymore.
And the core challenge for the U.S. seems to be
What?
overextension.
That's a huge part of it. It's a classic problem, actually imperial overextension.
Right.
Think about it. Maintaining global hegemony, being the security guarantor for Europe and the Middle East and Asia all at the same time.
It's incredibly costly.
Immensely costly. And those costs, they manifest as tensions everywhere.
We see it, don't we? Mounting global conflicts. I mean, look at the massive resource strain related to the conflict around Russia and Ukraine.
Right. And then there's the ramping up of tensions, diplomatic and military, with China.
Plus persistent struggles in places like Venezuela. It just feels like the sheer scope of playing global policeman is becoming too much.
The cost is becoming unsustainable, and that fatigue is definitely showing.
You even see that fatigue reflected inside the U.S. in the political debates.
Absolutely. It's not just academics and think tanks saying this anymore. You hear major political figures suggesting the U.S. needs to pull back.
Like who?
Well, for instance, when figures like Donald Trump publicly suggest Europe should handle the conflict in Ukraine on its own, that's a pretty clear signal, isn't it?
Yeah, it signals a superpower questioning its own priorities, its own capacity to keep up all these global commitments.
Exactly. And that internal tension, that questioning, it feeds directly into the second and maybe the most monumental factor driving this whole shift.
Which is
the undeniable rise of China's economy. I mean, if you were writing a history of the 21st century, China would have to be the centerpiece of the whole economic story.
no question. But we need to be careful how we measure that, right? GDP at current exchange rates can be a bit misleading.
Very misleading, especially because the yuan is, centrally managed. The most accurate measure, the one that really shows a country's real output and material wealth, is purchasing power parity, PPP.
Okay, let's quickly define that for anyone listening because it's a critical distinction.
Well,
What exactly is PPP and why does it matter more here?
sure. PPP essentially adjusts for the difference in local costs. It adds how many goods and services can your currency actually buy locally.
Okay.
So a dollar buys way less in New York City than its equivalent value, say, in Beijing or Shanghai.
Right.
PPP just removes that distortion. It gives you an apples-to-apples comparison of productive capacity.
Got it. And when you make that adjustment, the whole narrative about who's the biggest economy, it changes completely.
Dramatically. Officially, using PPP, China overtook the U.S. as the largest economy on Earth back in 2016.
2016, okay.
But if you really dig into the data and you properly account for purchasing power, China's actually been larger for about a decade now. A full decade.
Wow. And this isn't static, is it? This trend is accelerating.
It is. Every single year, the gap widens based on PPP.
And that contrast in global economic share,
Yeah.
it's stark because the lines are moving opposite directions.
Exactly. China's now roughly 20% of the global economy, and that percentage is growing year after year.
While the U.S.
The U.S. share is now less than 15%, and critically, it's falling. Those diverging lines. That's pretty much the definition of hegemonic decline, right there in the numbers.
It's fascinating how this huge macroeconomic shift then led to this kind of global wake-up call moment, which seems to be fueling the whole de-dollarization trend we keep hearing about.
Yeah, that wake-up call came directly from the heart of the existing power structure, didn't it? The U.S. financial system itself.
You mean the 2007-2008 crisis?
Precisely. That crisis, kicked off by incredibly leveraged financial products, mortgage-backed securities, CDOs, all that stuff, it basically showed the world that the supposed foundation of the global economy, Wall Street, was actually unstable, potentially self-destructive.
The whole world watched as the U.S. financial sector nearly brought down the entire global economy.
Right, and while the U.S. was struggling to recover, China powered right through that period with a massive infrastructure boom. That event, that crisis, was the definitive catalyst. It made countries seriously start thinking about diversifying away from relying only on the U.S. dollar.
And the result is visible. You can actually see it.
Oh, definitely. Look at commodity markets. Look at central bank behavior. Since 2008, global central bank holdings of gold have just skyrocketed. Absolutely skyrocketed.
This isn't just some minor blip then, it's structural.
It's structural, and the culmination is pretty significant right now. We're seeing reports that global central banks are actually holding more gold than U.S. Treasuries for the first time in many, many decades.
Wow. So official institutions are basically signaling reduced trust in the dollar. Or at least reduced trust in the dollar as the only safe bet.
That's exactly what it reflects. They're showing less confidence in the long-term stability and value of dollar assets compared to physical gold.
So it's not just gold going up, it's the dollar's perceived value falling relative to it.
Correct. It's the dollar's perceived intrinsic value, its reliability as the sole reserve currency that's eroding in the eyes of state actors. And losing that monetary leverage, that has huge implications for U.S. diplomatic power, military flexibility, everything. Hashtag Type 2, the infrastructure and manufacturing divide. So if the first part was mostly about financial data, this next part is really about physical reality, bricks and mortar, factories, the infrastructure and manufacturing capacity that really determines future wealth.
Right. And China cemented its position as the world's factory ages ago. But the story now is much more complex than just, cheap T-shirts or plastic toys.
That's the critical shift, isn't it? They aren't just churning out low-end goods anymore. They are relentlessly moving up the value chain. They're transitioning from imitators to innovators.
Becoming leaders in key high-tech industries.
Yeah.
Often outpacing the U.S.
Exactly. Just look at the examples. China is the undisputed world leader in electric vehicles, EVs, which are completely transforming global transport.
Okay.
They dominate solar panel manufacturing. I mean, they control huge chunks of the global supply chain there. And crucially, they're making massive, focused progress in core strategic areas like nuclear energy and even catching up incredibly fast in semiconductors.
Semiconductors, the real strategic choke point for the 21st century.
Absolutely. So the days of them just copying old Western tech, those days are definitely gone.
And the sheer scale of their infrastructure build-out is just staggering. Especially when you look at energy, it seems like a totally different strategic mindset compared to the U.S.
The examples almost defy belief sometimes. Think about capacity planning on their scale. China is building the world's largest solar farm up in the high-altitude regions of Tibet.
The largest in the world.
And at the same time, they've broken ground on the biggest hydroelectric dam project, also in Tibet. A project so enormous, its potential output could supply the energy equivalent of the entire United Kingdom.
Wait, one dam project could power the entire UK.
That's the potential scale we're talking about. It's mind-boggling.
Incredible. But they're not just doing renewables, they're also focusing heavily on baseload power, right?
Yeah.
Which brings us to nuclear.
Correct. China is currently undertaking the biggest nuclear energy buildup in human history, period.
How big?
They're building over 25 plants right now, as we speak, with plans for over 100 in the coming decades.
100 nuclear plants.
And they're not just building standard reactors, they're actively experimenting with really advanced, almost futuristic forms, like thorium salt reactors out in Inner Mongolia.
Thorium? Isn't that supposed to be safer and produce less waste?
Potentially, yes. And if they get it right, those reactors could offer thousands of years of clean, zero-emission energy from resources that are actually quite abundant.
So why? Why this relentless, almost obsessive focus on speed and scale in energy? This must point to that crucial difference in the incentive structure you mentioned.
It does, directly. The reason is fundamentally strategic. The Chinese electrical grid is state-owned. It's managed for public benefit and long-term national security.
Not for profit.
It's not managed by private equity funds whose main goal is quarterly profit maximization and, frankly, rent-seeking behavior. The incentive structure in China is geared towards rapid build-out, ensuring energy security, and serving the foundational needs of the entire economy.
And that focus on energy security is critical, isn't it? Especially looking at the geopolitics.
Absolutely. Building out massive domestic energy capacity reduces their reliance on importing oil and gas through potentially vulnerable sea lanes.
Like the Strait of Malacca.
Exactly. That's a key choke point that could easily be disrupted by a rival power in a conflict scenario. Energy independence translates directly into military and economic leverage.
Okay, now let's pivot. Let's look at the dramatic contrast here in the U.S. The stagnant energy grid, the failures of recent attempts at industrial policy.
The contrast is stark, isn't it? The actual output of the U.S. energy grid has remained virtually unchanged for 30 years.
30 years, despite population growth, despite all the new tech demands.
Despite all of that. And meanwhile, we've seen these widely publicized bipartisan attempts under both Trump and Biden to try and reindustrialize the U.S., bring manufacturing back from Asia, and largely they've failed.
But why? Why did those policies, which sound good on paper, ultimately stall out?
Well, a huge part of it comes down to regulatory complexity, but also the main tool they used, tariffs.
Tariffs create uncertainty.
Intense, crippling uncertainty for manufacturers. Think about modern manufacturing. It relies on incredibly complex global supply chains. A factory in the U.S. still needs to import intermediate goods, parts for assembly often from China or elsewhere.
Right.
If that company doesn't know what the tariff rate on those essential parts will be next year or the year after, how can they reliably plan the cost of their components? It makes it almost impossible.
So why would they invest billions to build a factory here?
Exactly. Why make that huge long-term investment when the cost of your necessary inputs is completely unpredictable due to political whims?
That environment of political and regulatory uncertainty just kills the kind of long-term investment manufacturing needs.
It actively discourages it. And compounding this, you see political dysfunction actually overriding clear strategic needs, especially in energy.
Like what? Any specific examples?
Well, we saw some profoundly self-destructive political moves. For instance, the quiet cancellation of what would have been the largest U.S. solar power facility. It was planned for Nevada, meant to power 2 million homes.
2 million homes. Canceled. Why?
Sources indicate that decision was made specifically to favor existing big oil and gas interests.
Wow. So choosing short-term financial gains for incumbents over long-term strategic energy needs and public benefit.
That's what it looks like. And now, that stagnant, underinvested grid is facing a monumental, immediate challenge.
The AI energy crunch.
Exactly. The energy demands of artificial intelligence are just enormous. These massive AI data centers, they need to run constantly. 247 training models, handling queries.
You use a lot of power.
Huge, unprecedented amounts of energy,
Yeah.
often equivalent to small cities. And the existing U.S. grid, underexpanded, often outdated, is simply getting overwhelmed. Leading to surging electricity prices and real immediate fears of shortages. It's the complete opposite scenario to what we see in China, which focused on massive capacity expansion decades ago.
It really highlights two fundamentally different paths, doesn't it? One focused on building capacity at breakneck speed for public good and national security.
And the other facing surging costs and potential shortages because of, well, systemic resistance by incumbents to the innovation and expansion that's clearly needed. #Tech3, the financialized and speculative U.S. economy. And this structural problem in the U.S., it goes even deeper than just manufacturing decline. It's about the fundamental framework of the economy itself. Since the late 1960s, the share of U.S. GDP coming from manufacturing has been continuously structurally falling.
Right. And that decline really paved the way for the rise of what economists call the FIRE sector. That's finance, insurance, and real estate.
And that FIRE sector has become the single biggest part of the U.S. economy and now makes up over 22% of U.S. GDP.
22%.
And it's still growing.
Still growing every single year.
Wow.
And critically, a lot of this growth is driven by financialization. That's the process of basically turning assets and transactions into tradable financial instruments.
So in real estate, for example, we're not talking about building new houses. Not primarily construction, which is productive labor. We're talking more about non-construction real estate. Specifically, existing houses being bought and sold, treated purely as speculative financial assets.
Just trading paper, essentially.
Pretty much. This rapid turnover and leveraging of existing assets, it creates this deep economic fragility, but without actually increasing real productive output in the economy.
And this fragility is now showing up in what many people are calling the AI and everything bubble.
Yes. The current U.S. stock market instability is, well, it's extreme. It's largely being driven by a very, very narrow set of companies.
The tech giants.
The one seen as the future of technology, yeah. The performance of the S&P 500 is overwhelmingly driven by just those magnificent 7 tech stocks.
So if that hyper-concentration of wealth and perceived value suddenly corrects,
The consequences for the broader U.S. economy could be severe. It would likely trigger a major recession. And the fundamental numbers behind the wider AI sector itself look highly speculative.
how so?
Well, there was a study by MIT that found something quite startling. 95% of AI companies in the U.S. are currently not actually making any money.
95% aren't profitable. But hold on. The argument you hear is that these companies are genuinely revolutionary. They represent a productivity surge we haven't seen since maybe the internet boom in the 90s.
That's the narrative, yes.
So is the current growth really based on solid productive assets, or is it more like a circular investment scheme?
That is the absolute critical question. And much of the investment does appear to be a kind of closed loop.
What do you mean?
Well, you see things like NVIDIA, which makes the essential AI chips, investing heavily in AI software firms like OpenAI.
Okay.
OpenAI, in turn, invests in cloud service providers like Oracle, and then Oracle turns around and buys even more chips from NVIDIA.
So the money just goes round and round within that ecosystem.
It's a mechanism that creates apparent growth and these massive valuations within that closed ecosystem, but it often lacks fundamental, real-world, broad profitability outside of it.
The valuation anomalies seem to confirm the speculative element you're describing. Let's look at a specific metric, like NVIDIA's price-to-earnings ratio.
Right, the PE ratio. It compares the stock price to the company's actual per-share earnings. A healthy, stable company might have a PE ratio somewhere between, say, 15 and 20.
And NVIDIA's.
NVIDIA's PE ratio is currently over 50.
50?
Yes, which is frankly irrational even for a company with high growth potential. It means investors are paying $50 for every $1 the company actually earns. They're betting almost entirely on spectacular future growth that might never actually materialize at that scale.
And if we zoom out from just one company, look at the overall market valuation, that famous Buffett indicator.
Yeah, the Buffett indicator measures the total market capitalization of all stocks relative to the country's GDP, and right now, it is screaming bubble territory.
How high is it?
It's currently over 200%.
200%. How does that compare historically?
For context, at the absolute peak of the dot-com bubble back in 2000, it hit maybe 180%. This is the highest it has ever been recorded in U.S. history.
Wow.
It fundamentally means the paper value of corporate America is literally twice the value of all the goods and services the entire U.S. produces in a year. That huge disparity signals a speculative bubble that makes previous bubbles look, well, relatively small.
And what's really crucial to remember here is that this speculative mindset isn't new, is it?
Yeah.
It led us directly back into the very crisis we talked about earlier, the 2008 crash.
Exactly. Despite the catastrophic collapse of 07-08, the U.S. housing bubble was reinflated almost immediately afterward.
Really?
Yes, which demonstrates a fundamental lack of long-term structural change or accountability, or even the desire, perhaps, to steer the economy away from this reliance on speculative finance. It just went right back to the same model. Hashtag tag Kyvie.
Yeah.
The domestic cost of U.S. oligarchy and polarization.
Okay, so this macroeconomic picture financialization on one side, deindustrialization on the other, it has profound visible consequences domestically, right? Things that directly impact the daily lives of ordinary citizens.
Absolutely. You see visible signs of polarization and decline right on the streets of U.S. cities that are frankly hard to ignore.
Like what specifically?
Well, the level of homelessness in the U.S. is shocking, and the data confirms it's actually getting worse every single year.
Worse every year.
Yeah. And when you contrast this kind of public spectacle of distress with places like China or many other parts of Asia where homelessness is virtually non-existent, it really speaks volumes about the different priorities embedded in the economic system.
And for the vast majority of people who are employed, the economic reality is often one of stagnation, isn't it?
Stagnation is the word. Real wages, what your paycheck can actually buy, have basically remained stagnant since the 1970s.
Since the 70s.
Yes. And here's the crucial linkage. Productivity gains the amount of value a worker produces per hour. Productivity has continued to rise steeply over those decades, but wages simply haven't kept pace with that increased productivity.
So workers are producing more value but not seeing it in their paychecks. Where are the gains going?
They're being captured almost entirely at the top, by capital, by management, by shareholders.
And this systemic wage stagnation leads directly to the affordability crisis that seems to define modern American life for so many.
It really does. Housing, as we mentioned, has been fully financialized, treated as a speculative asset first and foremost, which prices huge segments of the population out of ownership or even stable rentals.
Healthcare.
Astronomically expensive. Medical bills remain the single most common cause of personal bankruptcy in the U.S.
Still, after all the debate.
Still, and education, the supposed ladder for social mobility, it's prohibitively expensive for many, leading to absolutely crippling levels of student debt that burden people for decades.
Looking ahead now, one of the biggest concerns looming, tied to technology and automation, is the future of labor itself, even for highly skilled workers.
We're already seeing rising youth unemployment and perhaps more hidden underemployment, people taking jobs they're overqualified for.
Why is that happening?
Companies are leveraging automation and AI to dramatically increase efficiency, which means they can achieve results that might have previously required, say, 10 software engineers, with now just 2 highly compensated workers managing the system.
So structural reduction in demand for white-collar labor.
Exactly. And that's creating a major societal problem that's only going to accelerate as the technology gets better and more widespread.
And this looming structural unemployment has led to these two competing proposals for how society should organize itself going forward. You hear about a job guarantee versus universal basic income, UBI.
Right. The job guarantee approach, which some economists favor, focuses on ensuring productive labor. The idea is that every citizen who wants to work is guaranteed a dignified job, contributing to society maybe through building infrastructure, public service, care work, something like that.
Okay, that's one vision. UBI is different.
UBI is a profoundly different vision. It basically accepts mass unemployment as inevitable.
And interestingly, it's an idea often championed and funded by the very tech oligarchs, people like Sam Altman, Elon Musk, whose technologies are arguably driving the job losses in the first place.
Which is telling, isn't it? It's a vision that some argue sounds benevolent, but could be quite catastrophic.
How so?
It implies acceptance that millions, maybe tens of millions of people will be structurally unemployed. They'll survive on a basic check, maybe $1,000 a month, maybe a bit more, just enough to keep them alive, maybe keep them consuming things online, plugged into the tech platform.
But without productive lives.
Without productive work, without community purpose derived from contribution, maybe without the dignity of work itself. It's arguably an economic structure designed to keep the oligarchic status quo intact while just managing the social fallout of automation.
This system, then, where wealth gets concentrated and stability is maybe traded for speculation, it seems to be upheld by what many sources are describing as a kind of corporate feudalism.
Where monopolies and wealth extraction rather than genuine, broad-based innovation tend to reign supreme. You know, Peter Thiel famously summed up this business model pretty bluntly.
What do you say?
Competition is for losers.
Right, because competition drives down prices and profit margins.
Exactly. Monopolies, or near monopolies, resist competition fiercely to maximize profits, and they engage heavily in what's called rent-seeking behavior.
Rent-seeking, what does that mean exactly?
It's critical to understand. Rent-seeking means gaining wealth without producing new value. You're just leveraging existing control, maybe a patent, maybe a regulatory barrier, maybe software locks, to extract wealth from others.
And we see that kind of control in everyday life now, even with physical things we supposedly own.
Absolutely. Think about repair laws, or the lack thereof. New U.S. cars often require you to go to manufacturer-certified repair shops.
Why?
Because of sophisticated software locks. They prevent independent local mechanics from accessing the diagnostic data they need to actually fix the car.
Even if it's a mechanical problem?
Often, yes, because everything is tied into the software now. John Deere does the exact same thing with its tractors, forcing farmers into using authorized dealerships just for software updates or repairs.
So you buy the hardware, the tractor, the car, but the company still owns the right to control or fix it.
Effectively, yes. You're paying rent on something you thought you owned. That's pure rent extraction.
This leads directly to that provocative concept you hear sometimes. You'll own nothing and be happy. Not as some kind of socialist utopia.
No, definitely not. But as the potential reality of corporate feudalism, where everything from your housing to your entertainment streaming on Netflix to maybe even your transportation is increasingly rented, subscribed to, or somehow controlled by the tech oligarchs who own the platforms and the software.
And even leisure time isn't immune. It's being financialized too.
Look at the staggering rise of legal sports gambling. It's everywhere now. Or those phone apps like Robinhood, which arguably turn retail investment for ordinary people into something closer to a gambling addiction.
Yeah.
It reflects an oligarchy, some argue, that is actively prioritizing quick financial extraction, getting a cut of every transaction over building long-term productive capacity or ensuring societal stability. #TagV, systemic differences and lessons to be learned.
Okay, so all these structural issues we've talked through, stagnant wages, financial bubbles, energy stagnation, they seem to stem from fundamentally contrasting governing principles, don't they?
That really feels like the core divergence, yes. On one side, you arguably see a focus, at least stated, on public good and shared prosperity. On the other side, maybe more focus on speculation and relatively unfettered profit maximization.
Right. In China, the operating principle is often articulated. You hear phrases like, a rising tide should lift all boats.
And critically, that phrase about housing. Houses are for living in, not for speculation.
And the state actively governs based on these philosophies, sometimes quite heavy-handedly.
Sometimes brutally, yes. But the stated goal is to ensure stability and ensure growth benefits the broader population, not just a tiny elite.
And their approach to competition in really innovative fields, like electric vehicles, seems unique too. They actively prevent monopolies.
They do in those specific innovative consumer sectors. They foster intense internal competition between many domestic EV companies.
Why? Doesn't that hurt the company's profits?
It does create razor-thin profit margins for the companies, absolutely. But the government's goal there isn't maximizing corporate profit. It's driving down consumer prices and accelerating the pace of innovation through that intense competition.
So the consumer benefits.
The consumer benefits dramatically. Now, conversely, if a monopoly is deemed necessary, maybe in something like telecommunications, the energy grid, or massive infrastructure projects where competition doesn't make sense, then it's typically state-owned and managed, again, supposedly for public benefit.
Whereas in the U.S.?
In the U.S., the incentive structure is often the opposite. Big corporate monopolies tend to use their size and lobbying power precisely to resist competition in order to maximize profits for shareholders, often regardless of the broader public cost or impact on consumers.
The infrastructure case study of China's high-speed rail network seems like a perfect, tangible example of this difference in philosophy and long-term planning.
It really is. Western media initially heavily criticized China for pouring hundreds of billions into building this massive rail network.
They said it was a waste, a debt trap.
Exactly. They claimed it was a huge debt-fueled loss that would never, ever break even. And to be fair, that critique was probably valid in the very short term. It cost a fortune.
But now?
But recently, reports have confirmed that many of the key high-speed rail lines are actually turning a profit. But more importantly, forget the profit for a second. The system has fundamentally revolutionized Chinese society.
How so? What's the human impact?
Well, think about this story. It really sticks with you. Back around, say, 2007, a migrant worker trying to get from a major coastal city back to their rural hometown for the holidays might spend 45 hours on the journey.
45 hours?
Yeah, taking multiple slow trains, buses. It was an ordeal. Today, that same essential commute, thanks to the high-speed rail network connecting even smaller cities, can take just 5 hours.
Wow. 45 hours down to 5.
That's an immediate, massive improvement in quality of life, in family cohesion, internal economic mobility. It connects the country in a way that wasn't possible before.
You can compare that philosophy maybe to how the U.S. built the interstate highway system decades ago.
That's a good comparison. That was a huge cost borne by the government, but it created immense public good and economic integration for decades.
But modern U.S. infrastructure projects, they seem different. Notoriously slow, tangled in regulations, staggeringly expensive.
Yeah, we only need to look at the, frankly, prolonged, delayed, and incredibly costly process projected for rebuilding the Baltimore Bridge after its collapse. It highlights a vast difference in execution speed and national focus compared to what China achieves.
And this commitment to infrastructure in China seems to extend down to basic services that are essential for modern life.
Like internet access. China prioritizes cheap, reliable, lightning-fast 5G and fiber internet access across the country. They essentially treat it as a kind of basic human right necessary for functioning in a modern, digitized society.
Can you contrast that with U.S.?
Where you often have high costs, fragmented service, slower speeds in many areas, largely because providers operate as regional monopolies or duopolies with little incentive to invest in upgrades or lower prices.
Okay, finally, let's look at how these different systems attract or maybe repel talent. Where do the smartest people go?
That's a fascinating point about incentive structures. In the U.S. system, highly educated people, PhDs in physics, math, engineering, are very often drawn directly into the finance sector, Wall Street.
Why?
Because, quite simply, that's where the highest immediate compensation lies. They end up using their advanced quantitative skills not for building physical things or new technologies, but for financial engineering, for designing complex derivatives or high-frequency trading algorithms.
So it's the highest paying path right out of school, but it arguably extracts human capital from potentially more productive sectors.
And funnels it into speculative ones, yeah.
How does China handle this?
In China, the government actively tries to crack down on that specific trend. They actively encourage top talent to start new industrial ventures or develop new technologies in strategic fields.
They encourage it how?
They even provide state-backed socialist venture capital funds to specifically direct that human capital toward productive, innovative sectors. The explicit goal is to keep the nation's brightest minds focused on solving physical problems, developing new energy sources, creating real-world products, advancing manufacturing, not just modeling financial instruments.
You know, historically, these kinds of cycles, they aren't entirely new, are they? You can see parallels.
Absolutely. You see parallels even within Chinese history itself. Think about the Tang Dynasty, for example. It started with a period of meritocracy, land reform, incredible prosperity.
A golden age.
Exactly. Only to be followed eventually by the consolidation of power by an entrenched land-owning oligarchy, which ultimately led to stagnation and decline.
And you see maybe a similar trajectory in the U.S., moving from that post-WWII golden era, which was defined by high taxes on the wealthy, strong unions, significant public investment,
to the modern, deregulated, financialized oligarchy that many observers would argue we see today.
So the synthesis here seems pretty clear, wrapping this up. The data points we've looked at strongly suggest the decline of U.S. hegemony isn't just some random geopolitical shift. It's not just external pressure.
No, it appears to be a direct reflection of profound internal economic and political dysfunction.
A dysfunction where, arguably, an oligarchy operating effectively across both major political parties consistently prioritizes financialization and rent-seeking behavior.
Over long-term public good, over structural innovation, over investing in the productive capacity of the nation.
And when you look at the objective data on the other side, China's Human Development Index objectively improving year after year, per capita income rising rapidly, coupled with this massive strategic infrastructure investment.
And you contrast that with U.S. standards of living for the majority, which are stagnant or even declining in some areas, along with crumbling infrastructure. The difference in outcomes is becoming stark.
Which brings us back to that powerful, maybe provocative reflection we mentioned earlier, recalling the observation. We thought that China would become more like us, but maybe we became more like China.
Or at least like the negative aspects of oligarchic consolidation seen in its history.
Right. And this raises an important question maybe for you, the listener, to think about. Considering the objective success of certain elements of the competing model, China's sheer ability to execute massive infrastructure projects, its strategy for addressing monopolies in key innovative sectors, its prioritization of certain basic public services, should the U.S. perhaps consider adopting elements of that model?
Not wholesale, obviously, given the vast political differences, but specific structural elements.
Yes, specific structural elements aimed at improving the standard of living for its own citizens. What fundamental structural changes would actually need to happen here in the U.S. right now to shift priorities away from pure financialization and back toward productive public investment and maybe more balanced economy?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it?